Dare to enter Crow's Quill's books, where tales of forgotten realms and fearless souls come alive. Today's journey, Plato Wyngard and the Armour of the Gods, chapters 19 to 20 by Mark and James Lindsay. Will you uncover the truth hidden in the shadows? Chapter 19. Several hours later, Plato and his band of travelers were at the base on the western side of the Simeon mountain range, cold winds greeting them as they set up camp. Fearing for his life and with nowhere else for him to go, Plato had let Tool remain with them, something that the rest of the team were grateful for, as he proved to be quite adept at cooking. After setting up some protective countermeasures in the form of trip flares and claymores, they settled down to a hearty goat stew. With bellies full, the 5 men sat around the fire, and for the first time since Bian's death, Plato's thoughts didn't immediately fall on her. His base primal needs, food, shelter, and safety, consuming everything. The comfortable silence was broken by Nott. Question. After we kill Malekai and save the virgins, how much do you think we can get for the armor? Nott asked. Tool gasped at the blasphemy, while Luther and Teferi broke into laughter. Plato sat silently and pondered this. You can't be serious, Tool stammered, outraged. Hey, we'll give your government first dibs, Nott replied with a devilish grin. Tool was at a loss for words. Relax. I do believe that the young man is messing with you, Teferi said. Tool nodded but was still alarmed at the thought that they were joking about powers beyond their understanding. He does have a point, though, Plato said. Really? Not? Luther said incredulously. Hey, we all have our place. Some of us do the thinking and others the lifting, Nott said with a smirk. Luther scowled back. What I mean is, I have been so consumed with revenge that killing Malekai has nearly overshadowed everything else. Bian would want me to focus on the missing girls, first and foremost, Plato said. Hey, brother, we'll do what's right, as we always do. But I promise you that we'll also get that one-eyed son of a bitch, Luther said. Plato nodded. Tool, do you think you can fill in some of the blanks for us? Plato asked. Tool nodded. First, how did you get involved with Malekai and the birds of Memnon? That is easily explained. Like most men in my profession, I am constantly on the move. From one dig to the next, there is an unofficial network that allows news of work to get around. I was actually between jobs when a friend of mine told me of a well-paying job northwest of Gondar. Employers willing to spend good money on workers and equipment, Tool said. How many were hired? Plato asked. Nearly 50 good men, Tool whispered. How long had you been working for them? Plato asked. This part is unusual. Normally on a job like this, it would take months to get as far as we did. On this job, it was nearly 3 weeks. Their information was dead on, Tool said. What happened on the day? The last day? Plato asked. We had been working hard for a week. Your friend Malekai. He's no friend of mine, Plato growled. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. It's fine, please continue, Plato asked. Malekai and his men were very generous. Bonuses were promised, food was good and conditions fair, so we worked. 2 days out, and we were near the antechamber. Malakai's men were starting to get anxious and edgy. On the day we unearthed the sarcophagus, Malekai acted as if we didn't exist. He conferred with his men in secret, and they were excited. No. That's not right. It was more than that. They reminded me of the religious missionaries that would come around when I was a child, preaching the word of the Lord. I was little, but they scared me a lot. Just like Malekai, Tool said uncomfortably. Why didn't you just leave? Luther asked. Because now they were all armed. All the workers were brought down into the antechamber. They wanted an audience when they revealed the armor. We were all frightened and in awe. Then we were led away, topside, Tool said. Is that when they? Nat began. Tool nodded. They led us to the meal tents and ordered us to sit. No one argued. I was at the rear. Once everyone was seated, they opened fire. Someone in front was thrown back. Our heads collided. I blacked out. When I came to, it was dark, and I was lying amidst a pile of death. Malekai and the birds of Memnon were gone. I am ashamed to say that I sat there amongst the dead and cried. I was so glad to be alive. Tool said, his face red with embarrassment. You have nothing to be ashamed about. Through a sheer fluke of fate, you lived. Nothing you could have done would have changed the outcome, Teferi said. Tool remained silent, but Teferi's words seemed to have the desired effect. They departed before sunrise, knowing they had a huge day ahead. The morning temperature was cool and brisk. They now all wore heavy military jackets to cope with the change in climate. The high-mobility, all-terrain Pinscour traveled slowly up the narrow trail of the Semian mountain ranges. They had been formed by volcanic eruptions 20 million years earlier, some peaks rising as high as 4,000 meters with flat plateaus. They were now covered in soft turf and sparse shrubbery. Capra ibex, a wild breed of goat with long curved horns, were silhouetted against the skyline. With Teferi at the wheel, Plato and the others watched anxiously out through the windows. They passed the occasional village. The ranges were home to an eclectic assortment of tribes and people. 3 hours in, and the dirt trail they called a road had ended. This is where it gets difficult, Plato stated as he placed some last-minute items into his backpack. So much for a nice, leisurely drive up the mountain, Nat complained. You're getting fat. You need the exercise, Luther quipped. Nat sneered back, but covertly pinched the excess skin around his midsection. They saddled up and proceeded along the next ridgeline. Over the next hour, they hiked higher and higher towards the summit, the air getting cooler by the minute, frost dusting the greenery. They marched in single file, their hooded figures sending up vapors of condensation into the air. In the far distance, they could see the high ground they needed to reach, a flat plateau that sat high, well above the others. Visibility was ordinary, as all of the peaks over 3,000 meters were shrouded in mist. That's where we need to be, Plato said, and pointed up. What are you expecting? Luther asked. I honestly don't know, Plato replied. It wasn't like the message inscribed on Memnon's arm was all that. Illuminating, Nhat added. It was never meant to be easy, Teferi said. What's that? Plato asked. Knowledge and power must be earned. The prize we seek was never meant to be just found by anyone. If we are truly deserving, then we will find Memnon's sword, Teferi said. You really believe that? Luther asked. A few days ago, no. Now I'm becoming a convert, Teferi replied. How can you not? Tool said, puzzled. Tell me, Tool, when did you start believing? Was it when they were killing your friends, or when you saw the armor? Luther asked, a little annoyed. Tool appeared taken aback by this question. He was silent for a long while. I'm ashamed to say that I was afraid when I saw the armor. And when I regained consciousness after they shot my friends, I prayed to God. And after being with you and your friends here, I think that you're here for a purpose, Toole said. Luther sighed. I apologize. I can be a little abrupt when it comes to the subject of belief, Luther said. They continued down a short ravine when Plato called for a sudden unplanned halt. Stay sharp, Plato ordered, then grabbed Luther by the arm and squatted down. What's up, brother? Luther asked. We're being followed, Plato whispered. Luther's eyes went wide in alarm. How long have you known? Luther asked. 5 minutes. Maybe longer. They're really good, Plato said. How many? Luther asked. 6, but it's hard to tell, Plato said. How do you want to play this? Luther asked. Plato gritted his teeth, then pointed further down the ravine. I'm guessing that Malekai and his team are as unfamiliar with this area as we are. The trail appears to thin out down there and doglegs to the right, Plato said. Ambush, Luther prompted. Ambush, Plato nodded back. Tell the others. We move in 3. Plato continued to scan the area to their rear. The people tracking them were well trained. Almost ghosts. Almost. With everyone now aware of their predicament, it was only Toole who didn't know what came next. As predicted by Plato, further down the ravine the trail narrowed as it veered to the right. Breaking quickly from the track, they all hid behind the mounds of volcanic rock that lined the trail and waited, weapons raised. Patience was the key in a situation like this. 5 minutes ticked slowly by, and Plato knew their trackers hadn't been far behind. So where were they now? Plato thought anxiously. Do you think they saw us? Luther whispered. Plato shook his head. There's no way they could have seen us. We had the natural formation of the mountain on our side, Plato whispered back. At that moment, they both heard the soft tread of footsteps. Everyone waited with held breath. 3 figures crept along the trail, gray cloaks concealing their identities. Plato eyed the lead figure with the sights of his assault rifle. The 3 figures stopped and crouched low, armed with bows. Plato slowly squeezed his trigger when the sound of weapons being cocked sounded to their rear. Plato and the others spun around to find 6 cloaked figures standing behind them, all with bows, all raised, arrows notched and pointed. They had been outmaneuvered and outnumbered. Plato cursed himself as he signaled to the others to drop their weapons. Reluctantly, they complied. One of the figures stepped forward, his appearance hidden by the hood of the cloak he wore. With rifle raised, he advanced on Plato, then with sudden ferocity brought the butt of his weapon down. Plato blacked out. When he came blearily to, Plato discovered to his dismay that he couldn't move. He was being held in a darkened mud brick hut. It took several minutes for his eyes to adjust to the lack of light, and once they did, the sight dismayed him further. He was alone. Plato struggled against the ropes that had in essence hog-tied him to the rear. Plato wasn't sure how long he had been out for. Time had ceased to be something he could fathom in the dark, when 2 figures entered. Before he could say anything, a sack was dragged over his head, and he was lifted from the floor. Carried like a caveman's dinner, he caught brief glimpses of daylight from beneath the sack before being tossed roughly to the ground. Muffled voices could be heard. Then the sack was ripped from his head. Sunlight burned his eyes as he struggled to see his captors. When vision finally returned, he was surprised by what he found. Plato was lying next to the others, who were all similarly restrained. They were in the middle of a group of modest mud brick village huts, with curious touches of Western-style timber supports. The village rested upon a generous plateau. Standing before Plato were its inhabitants, a tribe of coffee-skinned men and women, their hair fair and features and physiques athletic and attractive. They no longer wore the gray cloaks from earlier, but plain clothing of heavy cotton and leather, which included sandals. No one spoke. The captives were only regarded with curious eyes. Plato cleared his throat with a cough and was about to speak when a voice addressed him from a distance. "Aggressors from the outside," a clear and authoritative voice spoke. Plato craned his neck to see who owned it. A man strode forward, his appearance similar to the others, only taller and sporting a thick beard. "We don't wish you harm," Plato replied. "Of course not. You're now our prisoners," the figure said. Laughter followed from the rest of the village, none of whom appeared worried or threatened by their presence. Plato went red. "For now," Plato growled. More laughter. Plato's anger grew. "By what right do you hold us prisoner?" Plato snapped. "What right do you have to pass through our lands uninvited?" The bearded figure challenged. Despite his building rage, Plato took a deep breath before replying. "We meant no disrespect or malice. Our intrusion into your land was unintentional," Plato said, measuring his words. "No disrespect or malice? Yet you come heavily armed into a place which holds nothing for you," the bearded man replied. Plato was silent. "Ha! Your silence speaks volumes. Outsiders with no honor or skill in the ways of the warrior, caught without effort. You sons of bitches, untie me, and I'll show you the true meaning of a warrior." Luther fumed. Instead of anger, this was met with cheers and applause. "Luther, buddy, we need to remain calm, don't." "Your friend has fire and spirit. We appreciate these qualities," the bearded man stated. "I'm getting awfully sick of your games. Who are you people?" Plato asked. "My name is Arius. I am chieftain of the Lacedaemonian tribe, descendants of the Spartan people," Arius announced. After proclaiming their heritage, Arius ordered his largest warriors to cut the restraints holding Plato and his group and allow them to get to their feet. For insurance, they were corralled into the center of the village and held in place by swords that would have looked at home in ancient Greece. Arius and 5 other fearsome-looking individuals conferred in private. "Do you believe these guys?" Not asked. "Are you for real? These whacks have had too much exposure to the high altitudes," Luther shot back. "I've heard stories, but I never believed," Toole began. "Don't start buying into it," Luther cut him off. "After the sacking of Troy, the king of Sparta was supposed to have passed through Ethiopia on his way home," Plato mused. "Not you, too," Luther groaned. "Look at their weapons. Hell, look at them. They're not exactly your typical Ethiopians," Plato said. "You said it yourself, Teferi. These ranges are full of eclectic peoples," Luther argued. "This is true," Teferi nodded. "Regardless, they believe it, and we're not in a position to argue the point," Plato pointed out. Just then, Arius and his council broke and regarded Plato and his team. "We have made a decision, but first I have to explain something to you all," Arius said, then motioned for one of his lieutenants to step forward. The man, who was about the same size as Luther, with narrowed eyes and a square jaw, held something wrapped in cloth. Arius nodded, and the cloth was removed. Underneath was a bronze Corinthian-style helmet, like that favored by the ancient Spartan warriors. It held indentations from battle, and atop sat a magnificent plume of black horsehair. It was spectacular. Whether you believe our heritage or not is of no concern to me. As I mentioned earlier, we are true disciples of the warrior. But in order to be the best, we hold knowledge and truth high above all else, Arius stated. There were murmurs and nods of approval. What do you require of us? Plato asked, matching the chieftain's steely gaze with his own. Tell us why you have traveled here. If what you say is true and worthy, then maybe you might just get out of here alive, Arius said. Chapter 20. Plato and his team were moved to an area set aside for tribal meetings. This was an open space of smooth rock facing a semicircle of carved stone seats, much like a grandstand, only smaller in stature. The entire tribe was present, with Arius and his lieutenants in front. Plato stepped forward from the group and cleared his throat. It took him an hour to tell his story in its entirety, starting with their initial sighting of the stone viper in Vietnam to their counter-ambush at the hands of their current kidnappers. Arius motioned for water to be brought for Plato as his throat was parched from his long tail. Plato looked up at the direct gaze of the tribe and was met with silence. Arius then took a moment to confer with his lieutenants. They spoke briefly, and then Arius turned to Plato. We believe that you have been honest with us. Despite the outlandishness of your tale, elements ring true, Arius said. Well, that's good, because it is true, Plato replied. We have heard of this group calling itself the Birds of Memnon. Who would be shuddering at the thought of what these usurpers are carrying out in his name? Arius said gravely. Then you will let us continue? Plato asked. I'm afraid it's not that easy, Arius replied. Sure it is. You do nothing, we leave, problem solved, Nat said. Arius ignored this. These ranges house multitudes of tribes. Most get along, some don't. However, they all know to leave us alone. Over the years, we have developed a test, Arius said. What test? Plato asked. On occasion, when we have a group or individual arrive unannounced, they are forced to participate in a test. Normally, the villagers will warn off anyone before they get anywhere near us. But I'm betting they were too frightened to talk with you, Arius said. What does this test have to do with us? And why should we participate? Plato asked, becoming annoyed at this new setback. It is tradition. It is a test of the warrior. No outsider may be permitted to leave without participating in the test, Arius stated. And if we refuse? Teferi asked. Then you die, Arius said plainly. They were escorted to a hut, where they were given an hour to make their decision. Armed guards waited outside. This is bullshit. I was starting to think we were dealing with rational people, then they pull this warrior shit, Luther said. And the fact that they refused to tell us about the test is bloody annoying as well, Nat said. I agree with both of you. Having said that, what choice have we got? We're miles from anywhere, deep in their territory with no allies to speak of, Plato said. These are the facts. 1, we're stuck, with no chance of escape. 2, we still have a job to do. 3, we know that the test will involve a warrior-type feat. 4, 2 of our group are probably not up to the task. I'm sorry, Nat. As much as you have been holding your own, your injuries are still extensive, Teferi said. I'll do whatever I have to, Nat said. But Teferi was right. The wounds he had sustained on the cruiser meant the Vietnamese soldier was not running at 100%. Again, I ask you all, what choice have we got? Plato said. There was silence. That's what I thought. They were brought before Arius and his lieutenants, who looked about as impressed, as if they were having a bowel movement. What is your answer? Arius asked. We realize that we don't have a choice. We also understand that this test will more than likely be something we are not used to, Plato said. What are you saying? Arius asked. I'm saying that one of my group was brought along for his safety. He is not a warrior or soldier. Plato indicated the laborer tool. Another of my group has recently received injuries. In fact, he should be in hospital, but that was not possible, Plato said, indicating not. What is your answer? Arius said. I'm saying that the three of us, Plato pointed to Luther, Teferi, and himself, we will be glad to participate in whatever the test is. Arius grinned broadly. Normally, only the individual or one volunteer from the group is required. But by your own offer, you three have petitioned to participate in the test of the hoplite. Arius said loudly so that all may hear. This will be a grand spectacle. Plato realized that he had unwittingly put all three of them in peril, and only the gods themselves knew what awaited them. That seals today's tale in shadows. We hope Plato Wyngard and the Armour of the Gods has drawn you deeper into its enigma. Return soon to Crow's Quills books, where the next chapter awaits, whispering secrets yet untold.